Well, we did it, folks. We have reached the end of the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's so weird to talk about this show ending because when you look at the current landscape of streaming, this show definitely feels like a product of a different era of streaming. I know it's only like 5 seasons, but that's how fast this like changing scales of streaming services moves. It just feels like, yeah, this was like a holdover from before the pandemic, and then the pandemic had the show on hiatus a bit, and it gave us a pretty choppy fourth season, and now we have the final season. It definitely felt like they had 5 seasons planned, and then they were like, well, we don't need to do more, but what else do we really have to say? And that's kind of like the vibe I got from this season. Okay, first off, I have loved this show since day one. I've been a huge supporter of it, I've been a fan of it. I love everything it's done pretty much. I'm not going to say it's been a perfect run where every episode has been breathtaking, every storyline has been perfect. It's had a few hiccups, it's had a few misses, but I love the effect and I love the effort put into it. So when you were telling me that story is going to be wrapping up, I do get excited because I do think like this creative team knows how to end something, I say loosely, where it's like, that's the last thing we have to say about this. Maybe not like the perfect conflict resolution, but it's like, that's it. We don't have anything else to say. That's kind of what I felt with Gilmore Girls, and that is what I'm feeling for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So 5 seasons in, we have reached the end. We had 9 episodes this season. We're going to be talking season 5. I don't know if it's the best season of the show, but it is certainly not the worst. This was billed as the final season, which really helps when you're crafting your narrative. You know exactly where you can go, exactly the beats you want to hit, what you want to get to before the run is over. That is what this did. A lot of this season was dedicated to furthering the story from the event it's taking place in. We're in the early 60s for the primary story of this season, but we also go to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all the way to that far distant future of 2005, which I'm doing like the mental gymnastics in my head about like who actually makes it to 2005. So I'm like, this is insane. How old are some of these people supposed to be? They do wear old age makeup, and sometimes it looks good, and sometimes it looks like, well, that's just like a facial prosthetic and we didn't do anything to try to change their body shape. Because let's be real, after 45 years, your body's gonna look different, not just your face. And I get it, it's silly, it's fun, but it's like, wow, it's kind of weird to like think about the timeline and stuff, because there's even a moment in the show where we learn that Abe was born in the 1800s, and that's just like a weird thing to think about because you haven't really thought about it. You're like, I guess he would be that old. It's very strange, and I'm okay when a show is doing that, when it's like, we are wrapping up our story, here's the further like prospects of what's happening. It can be done well, it can be done poorly. For the most part, what this season did was deliver the moments that it needs to. Here's Esther and Ethan. Like, of course we want to see what's going to happen to them. That makes sense. Here's how their careers went. Here's what happened to characters and their romances and the flings and all that stuff. That's important. When we deal with that stuff, it's like, okay, there's some beats we do want to hit, like the Miriam and Joel relationship. How does that end up? We have to hit that beat. What happens to the kids? We have to hit that beat. What happens to Susie? We have to hit that beat. And then for no reason, it also just adds specific details where it's like, what if there was a fight we're going to like spend maybe 10 minutes to between our lead characters, just for them to potentially have like a reconnection later on in like the 80s. It's like, that's okay, like, it's unnecessary. I understand why you did it. It just didn't really need to happen that way. What I will say though is like, that aesthetic worked when they spent an entire episode dedicated to like a roast testimonial of Susie. So it's like the 80s and she's getting like the classic comedy roast. Characters from the past that we've seen in the show, people we haven't seen in the show, talking about the events that led her to becoming one of the best talent agents in the entire like industry. That is a really good use of like just furthering the story, because we get to hit the specific beats for what we want to see happen with characters in the past and see how that conflict is going to resolve itself in the future. When you're jumping around so much, you do like leave some stuff out that's kind of important, and I I get it. We have 9 episodes to tell you a story and we want to hit like every beat for a moment. Sometimes it just misses the mark. But I will say the episode that's just a roast of Susie, incredible. Like a perfect use of the storytelling dynamic it's going for. Great use of character actors that we are familiar with. We're not too familiar with in this universe, so they feel like real comedians of the time. I think one of the biggest pieces of contention for this show and like this concept as a whole has always been like the actual jokes being presented on screen. I have seen arguments for, well, you're doing a story about comedy, the jokes need to be funny. We can't just have a joke and then have the fake audience in the fake show laugh at the joke if we aren't laughing with it. I do understand that criticism because you do feel that a lot of times. I think what this is going for more is like talking about the industry at large as opposed to being a piece of like a biopic of the industry. And that's kind of makes me go like, yeah, okay, so I'm not going to laugh at every single joke that Midge makes. But that's not to say she doesn't say funny things. That's not to say that what she's doing wouldn't be interesting at the time. It just would have been better if like some of those like actual like big laughs did come from the stand-up as opposed to the characters having reactions or just having weird pieces of dialogue thrown into places. I get it though. I understand. It's fine. Because this season does take kind of a huge tonal shift where it's like, okay, we make her a writer on the Gordon Ford show, which, okay, that in itself I can see as a fun narrative. Midge becomes a comedy writer. She's going to be writing jokes for a guy. It's very exciting. There's something to explore there. She's like the first female comedy writer on a big show like this. How does she play with the boys? All that stuff. They do delve into it in some interesting ways. Some things where it's a little too convenient. I do think, I know that's kind of like the point of the show where it's just leading up to her big break to get to that moment. But it does feel like at every turn there's not really a struggle for her in that capacity. Starts off with struggle, then everything just kind of uphill, getting easier there. And again, it's the final season. We want to see her succeed, so I'm not complaining that she won. I'm just like, yeah, this is exactly the trajectory that would happen over the course of a couple years as opposed to 6 months working in the industry. All that being said, all of the criticisms like, yeah, she's having that arc pretty fast. The final moments of the show, when she has the entire essence of what this whole 5 seasons has been about is distilled into a 4-minute stand-up bit, that is worthwhile, and that makes the entire show worth it. That makes every piece of like, oh, we're moving too fast with this narrative, that makes it work. I am 100% okay with that because we sold it in the last couple minutes. We had the entirety of the thing sold in those final minutes. It's a really good final episode, which is a really hard thing to do. And it's so hard to sell that moment where it's like, okay, this has to be worth it. We have to sit here and believe this is what we've been leading to. It does feel like that. It's in character. It is in tone with the show. Everyone is supporting her now. We're all there and enjoying it. It's really interesting. The writing stuff is kind of fun. It does just get a little bit like, oh, here's a quip for each guy instead of a real character. That's fun. We have other stuff to do. Like always, the budget is immaculate. I know Amazon can put the money into this, and I'm glad they do. The acting is phenomenal, and the costuming is phenomenal. Everything is just firing on all the usual cylinders. Sometimes it just feels like the heart's not in it all the way. I don't even mean that on like a acting level. I just mean in like an actual like metaphysical level for everybody involved in production. It's like, final season, we can take the shortcuts, we can do the shorthand here to get you to this scene, and we can lead you up to this next scene. It is still very strong and well done in every single piece of the word. Look, every actor, it goes without saying, this is a really good show with a really well cast ensemble. Everybody is delivering a lot of stuff. I mean, Alex Borstein, I think, has been the unsung hero of this show since day one. Her casting kind of came out of nowhere. You're like, wait, Lois Griffin is going to win an Emmy for this show? And then it's like, yeah, she's kind of the funny person here and there. She gets a couple of really impactful moments in this season, like specific episodes where she is just, here's the comedic force, here's the driving force, here is her emotional weight carrying this. It's very intense. I do think this is one of her finer performances of the show. Just like the final, the close to the final moments where you see her like finally breaking down and admitting to herself what she's doing about this. Because spoiler alert for the show, this is actually just a love story of Susie and Midge and like their relationship in the industry. And it's kind of beautiful that way, where you're like, yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing that you'd want to see happen. Like, these two people who didn't have anything when they first met have literally changed the entire landscape of comedy together. And in the end, they find their happy ending with each other. And that's kind of awesome in a way you're not really expecting. You want it to be more like bombastic and loud, or like, oh man, how'd they separate? What's going to go on? What's going to be the conflict? But it's actually just a love story. And I do appreciate seeing that because it makes it wholehearted and fun and pleasant. Rachel Brosnahan goes without saying, she is a star, she is a star, she is a star. This girl's going to get a lot of work after this show. If she wants it, I could definitely see her being selective with the project she works on. But she has been committed to this work. She has been committed to this style. It's going to be so weird to see her not look like she's from the 50s for a bit, because she looks like she's from the 50s, and it's kind of cool. She's just great. And Michael Zegan, Joel was like, I think one of the best uses of like how to change a character's dynamic. Because when the show starts, we don't have Stephanie Hsu in here anymore because she went off to make an Oscar-nominated movie. Well, I say Oscar-nominated. She was Oscar-nominated. The movie won a bunch of Oscars, so she's off doing something else. She can't be in the season. So Joel is on a whole new career path. And then the end of his arc is just, I love my ex-wife. I got nothing else to say. I'm fine with that. That does feel like we were always going to be there, because every single season does have the moments of like Joel and Miriam always coming back together. Maybe not like a romantic way, but in a platonic way, like these two are always drawn to each other. And that's a good use of his character, and it works fine, and I have no complaints by that. My biggest, I think, issue is Reed Scott as Gordon Ford, who is a top bill, not even top bill, but he's like a mainstay. He's in every episode, and it just kind of becomes like, oh, he's either the parody of the guys of the time doing the talk show thing. He doesn't have any dynamic. And yes, does Reed Scott look like he works for this time period? Yes. Do I need to see this guy in everything? No. I'm glad his agent is getting him work, but sometimes his entire arc was just a little too obvious, a little too uninteresting, didn't go anywhere special, but he did have good chemistry with Rachel, so I have to commend him for that. It did work well. As always, the parents are great. I mean, just the older comedic actors coming in, knocking it down. There's a great moment with Tony Shalhoub near like the end of the season where he's just like, what does it all mean? I thought like men were supposed to be one thing, but my daughter bought the apartment I live in, and she's doing something I don't understand, but doing better than anybody I know. It's weird. What is life? What is any of this? A really good speech that I did enjoy. And it just made me like, yeah, man, that's the moment. Because Abe was like a favorite character of mine. Just from like the delivery of Monk himself, just being Monk. It's really fun. And in the end, I did like what we got. It had all of the right beats for classic Maisel stuff. There is some interesting uses of Lenny Bruce in this season. We do be like, hey man, we could have saved you, but we didn't, because he didn't want to be saved. And I'm like, oh, did we need that? Did we need to drive that dagger deeper into the spleen of what Lenny Bruce's career is going to become? It's a little weird, but I get it. It's very stylized, it's very quippy, it's fun, it is flirty, it looks great, it's well written. Couple times it doesn't perfectly nail what it's doing, and it feels a little rushed, but for the most part there is this finality to it. It is done, it has ended, it did leave me happy, it left me smiling, it did let me sit there for a minute and just like ponder what I was experiencing. And that's the best I could ask for in today's streaming climate where everything is coming at you all the time. That a show that feels like a holdover of another era actually had me sit down and go, you're right. There is something about writing, there is something about comedy, there's something about life worth talking about. Maybe we should do it. Maybe this stuff can be good and fun and exciting with great actors trying hard. And maybe we just need some quippy, flirty content again. It's fun. You know? It worked and it saved it. And you know what? It was marvelous. And that's the best thing I can say about a show like this. It always had me. I was always there. Maybe it was a little hit or miss, but I was always there. In the end, it did have me on its side throughout every single interaction that happened. So, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Season 5, the final season, I am going to give an 8 out of 10. Now, thank you all for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.